Hi, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to our class in ethics. In our last topic, we talked about the three kinds of law that would govern in determining the morality of the action of man, whether the action of man is good or evil. So, can you still remember the three laws? We have the eternal law, the natural law, and of course, the positive law. So, this afternoon, we are going to touch another topic. Now, if you will observe, ever since we've been talking about the action of man being subjected to moral evaluation. So, a question can be asked whether all the actions of man can be subjected to moral evaluation. Tanan bang lihok sa mga tao pwede na itong ma-determine whether or not it is good? What do you think? Okay, so not all actions will be subjected to moral evaluation. Okay, so not all actions, dili tanang lihok sa mga tao o tanang lihok sa tao is subject sa moral evaluation. First, we have to classify the actions of man. Actually, actions of man can be classified into two. And what are these classifications? The first is human act, and the second is act of man. Okay, human act and act of man. Let us first discuss what is human act. In the understanding of human act, we have to know that there are constituents of human act. No? So there are three constituents or elements of human act. With these three constituents or with these three elements, we can say that an action of man can be considered human act. Meaning to say, all these three constituents or all these three elements must be present so that an action can be considered human act. Or sa Bisaya pa, lihok nga tawhanon or lihok sa usa ka tao, human act. So, let us explore what are the three constituents of human act. The first constituent is knowledge. Knowledge. An action of man can be considered human act if there is knowledge. Meaning to say, man, as he is doing the action, has knowledge about what he is doing. Ang usa ka tawo dunay kahibaw sa nature sa iyang gibuhat, so that while doing the action, he has a full knowledge and understanding of what he is doing or the effect of his action. For example, sa usa ka tawo nga mitabang sa mga tawo nga nanginahanglan, or sa usa ka tawo nga nagdeal og shabu, no? So when he does the action, he is fully aware of the nature of the action that is being done. That is knowledge. Okay? Kahibaw ka, dili ka ignorante, wa ka nagdamgo, bukas ang imong mga mata of those things that you are doing. That is the first constituent of human act. The second constituent of human act is will. Will. This means to say that when the person is doing the act, there is the will. There is the presence of the will. That person decides. That person has made his decision, has exercised his will in doing the act. For example, you are planning to go to the town, and yet your mother told you, adyaw ka adto sa lungsod kay daghang kaso sa COVID sa lungsod. And yet, in spite the prohibition of your mother, still you go to the town. Imong gigusto, you willed, you decided to go to the town. So, in an action that is considered human act, there is an exercise of the will. Imong gigusto, perhaps na ay mga babag o na ay mga ningbabag, and yet, in spite of all this, you still continue in doing the action, showing the will. Okay, so that is the second constituent. So take note, for a human act to be considered so, there is the presence of knowledge, nakahibaw ka, nakasabot ka sa imong gibuhat, ug ang ikaduha, there should be the will, the presence of the will. Imong gidesisyonan, no? Imong gidesisyonan, imong gi-exercise ang imong will in doing the act. And the third constituent of human act is freedom. Freedom, kagawasan, meaning to say that in the exercise of the will, there is no force, external force, that forced you to do the act. Okay? Nga sa imong pagbuhat sa maong aksyon or lihok, gawas nun ka nga nagbuhat. No external forces. Why nagtio nimo og pusil? Why nagpugos nimo? You do it on your own volition. You do it freely. Okay? So, these are the three constituents of human act: knowledge, will, and freedom. Means to say that human act, with the presence of the three constituents, is or are actions that undergo the full deliberation of a person. No? Ang human act di ay, with the presence of the three constituents, mga lihok sa tao nga ning agi og deliberation, ning agi og huna-huna sa tao. No? Dunay pagtimbang-timbang, dunay paghimo sa desisyon, and in fact, it is in the atmosphere of freedom. And because of this, no, tungod niini, it entails responsibility. You are responsible to your action if the action is human act, because you have knowledge about it, you do it freely, and then there is an exercise of the will. So it is in human act, or it is the human act that will be subjected to moral evaluation. Okay? So, ang mga lihok nga atong gi-consider nga human acts, mao tong atong i-subject whether that action is good or evil. Okay? So, Balik ta sa unang pangutana, are all actions be subjected to moral evaluation? The answer is no, because only those actions that are considered human acts can be subjected to moral evaluation. Okay, so ang pagtuon, your study, can you consider it as a human act? Ang imong pagtuon? Let us see. Ang pagtuon, knowledge, kahibaw ka unsay nature sa pagtuon. Ngano nga magtuon ang usa ka tawo? Para asa man ang pagtuon. So, there is knowledge and understanding about pagtuon. Second, will. Doon na ba nagpugos nimo nga magtuon ka? Wa. No? In fact, ang imong nanay niingon, adyaw sag eskwela karon kay COVID, and yet niingon ka dili nay mo eskwela ko. So there is the presence of the will. And of course, there is the presence of freedom. All these three elements or constituents are present. Therefore, ang imong pagtuon, ang imong pag-eskwela is a human act. Okay, so pagtuon now, since it is a human act, can be evaluated whether it is good or evil. Paglakaw, mulakaw ka karon, nay, mulakaw ko, madto ko og lungsod. You know the nature of your action. You will leave your house, you will travel. So, na kay full understanding sa imong gibuhat. Na kay will. No, gipugngan ka sa imong nanay, adzaw lakaw kay naay COVID, and yet you decided muadto kunay sa lungsod. You exercised your will. Adto lagi lakaw kay nakasakit ang imong tatay, and yet you decided to go to the town. And there is freedom. You are able to do what you want to do. So ang imong paglakaw can be considered human act. Therefore, it can be evaluated whether or not it is good. Nasabtan ba? The second classification of the actions of man is the act of man. Act of man. So, these are actions of man that do not undergo full deliberation. And in fact, there is the absence of all or any of the constituents of human act. Kasagaran, acts of man are actions that man does as a result of the physiological or the biological processes of the human body. For example, ang kagutom, thirst, kauhaw, other bodily processes, no? These are acts of man. Mangutot ang usa ka tawo. We cannot say nga, uy, dautan ang pagpangutot or maadyo ang pagpangutot, because pagpangutot is a human process that cannot be controlled. There is no freedom. Kung bation ka o kaututon ka, bisan og saon pa rin imong pugong-pugong, mangutot gazug ka. Therefore, you are not free. And there is no exercise of the will. Kay bisag dili nimo gustoon. Kung kaututon gazug ka, mangutot gazud ka. Ang kauhaw, ang kagutom, no? These are examples of acts of man, and these actions cannot be subjected to moral evaluation. There are also instances, for example, you are able to do an act while you are sleeping, no? When you are dreaming. And there have been cases brought to court about persons who are able to do certain crimes. For example, nakapatay sila og tao, but when they did it, they were sleeping or they were dreaming, no? They were dreaming that they were killing an animal or killing a wakwak, but while they are dreaming, they are actually doing it. They were able to kill a member of the family or another person, but they claim innocence on that action because there was no knowledge and there was no will and there was no freedom because it happened while they were dreaming. No, nagdamgo sila, wa sila kasabot nga ang ilang gidamgo tinuod di ay nga nanghitabo. And similar cases, so long as the action has no freedom, no will, and no knowledge, then that action can be considered act of man and therefore cannot be subjected to moral evaluation. Always remember that only those actions classified as human act can be evaluated, can be determined whether this action is good or bad. I hope you have learned something in our lectures this afternoon. If you have some questions, do not hesitate to write it down in our comment section, or you can write your question on our group chat. Okay, so thank you and be safe.